Hello, and welcome to Rob from the Internet Talks About Beer, a show where we discuss different styles of beer, beer history, beer flavor profiles. We give shout outs to breweries we think make exceptional beer, and we talk about whatever else comes to mind during the course of the conversation. I'm Rob from the Internet. Let's talk about beer. Joining me today is Kal Wallner, owner and proprietor of the electricbrewery.com. Kal, if you would, tell me a little bit about yourself, how you got into craft beer, and what you do when you're not doing craft beer stuff.
Hi, Rob. Thanks for having me. I've been brewing on and off since the late 80s. Started getting into it back in my post-secondary days off in university, just trying to save a buck, make something that was maybe palatable, but not wasn't always the case. Back then we were able to, make excuses for what we made because it served a certain purpose, which wasn't the same thing that I'm doing these days. And extract kits only back then. The quality was, questionable, and craft beer wasn't really a thing back then, right? I think the beer of choice that we were drinking was Molson Golden or Export or all these Canadian beers that were popular at the time because there really wasn't much else to choose from. So by brewing a bit on my own, I found that the ones that would give me the best flavor possible were often the stouts or stronger flavored beers because of the limitations of extract kits. So I kind of stuck with those for a while, and they tasted not bad for what I was doing, and stopped for maybe 10 years from around, I guess, mid 90s. No, sorry, maybe only 5 years. And I got back into it around 2000 and moved right to what are called all 100% wort kits. So basically what you're doing is you're getting this big bag of wort, which is unfermented beer, that you could then ferment out. So those were great, but the problem was, you weren't actually really making anything. Somebody else had figured out a recipe, had done all the work around the flavor profiles and things like that, and then you just kind of take over. It's in a way, it's maybe not fair to some, but it was kind of like reheating, like a microwave dish or something, like leftovers almost in a way. So you can still have great stuff, but if you want to be in control, it's not really what is the best solution. So shortly after that, around 15 years ago, I started looking at going all grain, which means you do stuff completely from scratch, just the way the breweries do. You're opening up a sack of grain, you're picking and choosing how much of what you want, what hops for flavors, and how you adjust your water too comes into play a lot more. I had all the background from the cold side of brewing, which is all the fermentation, packaging, and serving sides, but I hadn't really done the all grain stuff. So I started looking around, like, how would I do this? So I'm in Canada like yourself, and a lot of people were using burners on pots outside. The burners create so much carbon monoxide that you're kind of forced to do this outdoors, unless you want to kill yourself. It's not safe. So I started looking around and found out there was really no easy way to do this indoors without giant ventilation systems that you sometimes see in restaurants, these giant hood fans and stuff. And putting that in your house, I thought, well, I don't really want to do that. What do I do? And my background's in electrical engineering, so I took that knowledge and the knowledge of brewing and decided to see how can I do something that's electric so it's safe to do indoors. That way you have no noxious fumes. You have steam still needs to be evacuated, but that's easy to manage. And about a year of testing out things, trying different things, buying lots of different parts, prototyping, building, I came up with something that I was happy with. So that's what I have today. And it's the design that you can see on the electricbrewery.com, where I step through step by step exactly how I built everything and give parts lists and so on and so forth. So it's taken off. It's been very popular. We have now customers in over 60 countries. And by customers, I mean we also sell a lot of the components that are required, either pre-built or in kit form. So over the years, we've had tremendous interest. And nowadays, you can find electric setups everywhere. I remember when I first started, I was a guest on a lot of talk shows like this, and there was a lot of sort of like, no, you can't use electric. You can't heat with electricity. That's going to scorch. It's not going to work right. Some of the competitors were very adamant about that, and some of the people that would email or call me would ask, well, so and so says it's going to scorch and you're going to ruin your beer. I said, well, it hasn't happened to me yet. I've never had any concerns or issues, and now we're about 12 or 14 years in or so that we've been offering up our free plans and whatnot, and it's been a fun ride.
Yeah, your website is a fantastic resource for anybody who's looking to get into building their own brewing system setup.
Thanks.
Um,
Thanks.
I have to admit I've looked at your website several times, and I often salivate over your brewing space because it looks absolutely fantastic. Your entire setup for your basement area
Thank you.
is great. Um, I was actually just on your website not that long ago, about 3 or 4 months ago, just looking to see if things had changed and whatever.
Yeah.
And you're right, you guys offer a lot of advice. You guys have all your step by step stuff that you've got that you took painstaking time to come up with, and you sell kits. So people, if you want to build your own controllers, they'll
Yeah.
sell you the kit. You just want to buy a controller, they'll sell you the controller. It's fantastic. And it looks like, I mean, everything you've got listed on your site for your kits and everything all looks like it's high quality. And
Thanks. Yeah.
if you're trying to get into this hobby, and you want to take a few quote unquote shortcuts, I mean, your website's a great place to start because it'll give you all the all the stuff, and the pitfalls and things like that. You guys have already gone through all that, so you can kind of help navigate people around what would be the issues and things like
Yeah.
that.
You'll see. I was a bit nervous at first when I started posting the instructions. I waited about a year before I posted anything because I thought, what am I missing? Like something is, I'm going to miss something. People are going to have issues. And no, and at the end of the day, I haven't changed anything on my setup that I've used. And since I was designing it for myself using my engineering background, I wanted something that wouldn't require fiddling or repairing or replacing parts. So I went mostly industrial parts throughout. I only use stainless and silicone, and the things that touch the beer are, pharmaceutical grade or restaurant grade, things that you'd see in a major brewery, but not necessarily with that same scale. So, it's been a fun ride.
Yeah, and you also have like if I remember correctly, you guys have like recipes and things like that
Yeah,
if people are looking
exactly.
for inspiration, or they want to try something out before they venture off on creating their own,
Right.
or they don't want to spend the money to join one of those sites or get a program that helps you design beers. You guys have recipes all set up so people can try them out and they can see, oh yeah, this is something I'd like to brew more of,
Yeah.
and then they
Yeah.
can go from there, which is
You,
nice.
this is something that I always harp on a lot is that equipment doesn't make beer. A brewer makes beer. And a brewer uses equipment, of course, but half the time, like when you look at a recipe only has subtle listings of the ingredients that go into a beer. It doesn't talk about the process and whatnot. And process is very, very critical because depending on your process, you might change how you add hops, when you add hops, what you do, right? You look at a commercial brewery that might have what they call knockout hops or flame out hops. Those are hops that go in often into the boil at the very, very end, or even in their filtration system. They often use giant, cylindrical systems for filtering. When they add isn't the same as when a home brewer adds because the volumes are completely different. When you brew on a professional level, the wort keeps boiling for literally half an hour sometimes because of the thermal mass. So there's
Yep.
lots of stuff. Water is another one. Water's, I think, very critical to get right if you want to get the most out of your beer. Otherwise, you're kind of guessing at things. And so I made sure that when I wrote all this, I did an entire brain dump of not only how to build the stuff, but then how to use it. So I have guides on how to adjust your water, how to aerate your worts or oxygenate it, how to make a yeast starter, because I always said the cold side is the most important, the fermentation side, which is the cold side, is the most critical, most important. You got to get that right. Otherwise, you're just rolling your dice half the time. So um,
Right.
I think it's very important to look at a brewing setup from start to end and how you use it. What's best for one person doesn't necessarily work for somebody else if the process is different. So
This is true.
yeah,
Yeah, and I've found in my brewing time that the hardest and most important thing is consistency.
Sure. Yeah.
Um, when you're brewing a beer, if you want this beer to turn out exactly the same every time, you have to follow the exact same
Yep.
steps and do it exactly the same every time.
Exactly.
And for a lot of home brewers, that can be kind of tough because they don't have big automated systems that will automatically shift things around and everything. So
Sure.
you really have
Sure.
to keep on top of it.
Yeah. Yep.
One thing I do like about the systems that you sell, even though I'm going to sound a little bit like a hypocrite here because I have a fairly automated system.
Okay.
Um, you have a fairly non-automated system. The only thing you guys really have automated is temperature control
That's right.
for the vessels and things like that. And that's great,
Yeah.
especially if you're just getting started and you really want to feel hands-on.
Yeah.
I'm at a point where brewing beer, I like to try and automate as much as I can because I want to do other things while the beer is brewing.
Sure.
But when I first started, everything was very
Yeah.
very much hands-on, very very touchy. And I think that's probably the best way to learn. And the systems that you set up
Yeah.
are simple yet elegant, but they provide you with that. You really have to control everything except the temperature of
And
of the vessels.
well, you do set the temperature, and it's funny you mentioned the control because I brew during the day often while I'm doing other work and whatnot. And I find the setup I've built and designed is very much hands off up until you get to about the boil, and then I start cleaning things because there's nothing in the world that's going to clean the setup for us after the fact.
That's
I
for
mean,
sure.
so other than a couple of button presses and maybe a hose move, the first few hours I'm not in there at all. I'm in there for 5 minutes total for the first
To get things
3-4
started.
hours.
Yeah.
You mash in, and I find I don't even have to like stir or do anything. I just throw everything in, flick a few switches, walk away, and then I come back an hour or 2, 3 hours later. If I'm doing a more complex step mash, yeah, I have to come down and hit the up button a few times to change the temperature, but that's about it. And brewing's interesting. There's very few extremely precise things we need to do on a time frame other than boiling. You want to make sure you boil something the right amount of time in
Yep.
terms of hops and whatnot. But when it comes to like step mashing or whatnot, it doesn't matter if you hold at 60 minutes versus, or if you go a bit long. Let's say if you want to hold at 60, sometimes I'll be out doing grocery shopping and that turns into a 3 hour hold. That's fine. It's just sitting there and everything's converted as much as possible. The long chain starches are broken down into small chain sugars. And um, so it was a kind of a battle between how automated do I go versus how easy do I make it to clean and how much do I want to be involved. And I found while there's certain things I could automate, like step mashes, I wasn't really saving any time. I was having to reprogram all those options in originally, with a more complex interface. And if I fat fingered something and put in 9 minutes instead of 90 minutes, well, I wouldn't find out till later when I go, oh crap,
Right.
I'm 4 steps ahead, or what happened? And then I go back and look at the thing, and it's like, that's not what I meant to do. So I prefer to keep things kind of simple and. But still, I automate the annoying parts. The annoying parts are like maintaining temperature. Nobody wants to sit there and flick the flame or the burner on and off every few seconds. That's not going to work, right? That gets old very fast.
Yeah,
So
it
to
does.
each their own. I mean, everybody has their own sort of requirements as to how specialized they want to go or how automated or not. So it's fun to experiment and build whatever works for you.
Yeah, most definitely. All right, so let's take a little
Sure.
gander at
Okay.
your setup here.
I'm going to flip the camera around so that you can see. I can figure out how to do this in this app. It
Yes,
worked.
Kal is the first guest I've ever had on to use the Riverside mobile app on his phone, and he's trying to figure out. We figured it
Yeah.
out earlier, but
Yeah, it
now it's
worked
a matter of trying to
before.
figure out
Now
how to get
it's
back into it.
not giving me the option here. Usually there's something, an option on my screen. Hang on a second. I'm gonna walk into the brewery backwards while I do it. At least give people something to look at. Because it seems
Yeah, there's a
this.
controller behind
Yeah,
me.
the aspect ratio is now locked too. I can't change that, and I can't
That's
seem to
weird.
flip around. I
I
think.
wonder if it's because it's recording,
Yeah,
maybe.
I think so. So, I mean, I'll show you what I have here, and maybe I'll even turn on the control panel.
So which control panel do you have? Do you have a 30 amp? Do you have a 50 amp? What do you got
This is a
sitting there?
30 amp. So this guy right here is meant to control two heating elements, one in the hot liquor tank and then one in the boil over here. And it's good for about up to, yeah, I'd say around 20 gallons batch size. That's anything above that, you probably want to start putting in two heating elements. That's sort of the point where I tell people, consider maybe having a couple for faster ramps, faster heat up times and whatnot. Right now, it's perfect for me because I have 20-gallon kettles and I brew 10 gallons packaged. So
There you go.
two kegs, two of these kegs here filled.
Two little corny kegs.
That's right.
Yes. So are those Blickman vessels that
They
you've
are,
got on your
yeah.
table there?
So back in the day, Blickman was the ones that I liked the most. They have lots of great features that make brewing really simple. There's more options these days, but frankly, if I was buying again, I'd still get the Blickman. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, they make fantastic equipment. I mean, it's all high quality and everything. So
Exactly.
you can't go wrong.
There's a lot of things they have, which I think nobody seems to add anymore because of cost. One of them is a sight glass here. So you get this giant sight glass that gives you actual, readings or whatever. And while they don't seem maybe that useful, they're great for measuring level and sparge rates and whatnot as you're transferring from one vessel to the other. And it also allows you to look at levels while you're boiling and doing other things, because often what happens is as the wort's jumping up and down, boiling, markers on the inside just don't work. Nothing like
Right.
in there can be seen and understood because of all the foam and everything else. And they also have, what I also like is the false bottom is completely tool free to remove and clean. There's just a pull out dip tube that you do by hand. It pulls right out. Everything's quick and easy and simple.
So if I'm looking at your tanks here properly, it looks like your HLT is a Herms setup because you've got
It is, yep.
two lines going in there.
Yes.
Nice. So if you would do a quick rundown for people.
Sure.
Herms versus Rims.
Okay, so what happens is, with a 3-vessel setup, the typical way you do it is you heat water in the first one. It's called your hot liquor tank. And liquor is a fancy word in brewing for water. Don't ask me why they started that. The middle one is your mash tun. That's where you put your grain in and then transfer some water over from your HLT to your mash tun. And the last one is where you boil. So each of them has its own unique job and it has its own unique tool. So in the HLT, you have what's called a Herms coil, which is this giant thing here. Sorry about the noise. So really what you're doing is you are maintaining and heating your mash, which is in the secondary one, indirectly through that heating coil. So there's a heating element in this guy as well, and it maintains the water at a certain temperature. And your mash is constantly recirculating, not the grain, just the sweet wort, the sugary liquid, goes through this coil to pick up heat from the water that's still in your HLT and to maintain temperature. So really all you're doing is, you're setting your temperature here on the control panel. You're typing in your numbers, whatever you want to do, whatever temperature you want to mash at. So say I want to do like 152 or something. You just do that. You turn it on. And everything is recirculated through pumps. There's a couple of pumps switches. You can see the pumps down here. Apologies if I'm not showing things exactly right because I can't flip the camera around. So
Oh no, it looks perfectly fine, man.
I'm having to kind of look at this on
You're
the
doing
side.
a great job for having to ad hoc this. Yeah.
So Herms is one way to heat, and I like it because it heats indirectly, and it's also probably the most popular these days. So what happens is the water that's in here is never more than a degree or two above what your temperature is here. And there's another method, a more direct method of heating called RIMS, which stands for recirculating. Actually, no, I didn't tell you what Herms stands for, so I'm not going to tell you what RIMS stands for either. It just confuses the issue. Partially because I can never remember exactly right. RIMS has a little heating element in a tube, typically, and the wort comes out of your mash tun, goes through that tube, has direct contact with the heating element, and then goes right back in. So that's another way to do it. The downfalls in my eye is that you need a third heating element, which means you probably need a higher powered control panel. You're also heating the wort directly to often well above the temperature that you want to mash at. So There's maybe some enzyme conversion issues with that, which I find kind of doubtful. But the bigger issue is that if ever the pump stops for a second and the flow stops, you're going to scorch that stuff instantaneously almost. It's a very bad thing. So people that build rim setups, I always tell them put an interlock in. So if ever the flow stops, like you have to need flow switches and things like that to make sure that you cannot scorch your wort at all.
Right.
Herms doesn't have that concern. It's always indirect. There's never any issues. So I find it's a simpler solution. There's less cleaning as you're not having to clean a rims tube. This guy here only ever has water in it. Now the inside of the tube does get a wort that flows through it, but I actually sparge through it. So when it comes time to rinse the grain of the sugars and put them into the boil kettle, I rinse through that coil to wash it out. So it's one less thing to clean.
Very nice. Yeah, I too am a big fan of the Herm setup as opposed to a direct rim
Yeah.
setup, because I have scorched wort
Okay.
before when a pump died,
Yeah.
and that's what made me a convert.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it made more sense to me anyway. It's a little more of a complex setup for a lot of people. They don't quite they don't quite understand it
Right.
at first, but
Sure.
once they grasp the concept of it, it's a much better way, in my opinion, to brew beer, because you have you have those safeguards.
Sure.
So
Especially for a three vessel setup. I mean, it's you've already set up
yeah,
for three, so it becomes questionable. Why would you do rims on a three vessel setup? I have a
yep,
guide or an FAQ on my website too, under the building your brewery menu, that kind of goes through all the pros and cons of each. So people can read, take a look, and decide for themselves what makes sense for them. You know.
yep. That's a nice setup you've got in your basement there. That's fantastic.
Thanks.
It's I mean, it looks like a commercial setup, which is great. You've
It's
got
it's our second setup. I mean, I had something that's it's shown on my website. The original brewery was in a small cold room that we had in a house that we built. I didn't build the cold room, but it seemed perfectly suited for that. So I sort of took it over for that. And I think it was 2011 we moved to this house, and one of the things we wanted in the basement was a home theater and a dedicated brewery. So we put in windows, from the bar area, so you can sort of see in, you know if you're sitting in the bar here, we have seats here. You can sort of see it, and it gives you that sort of the brew pub feel. You can watch the evil genius at work making your beer as you
and
consume it.
do you often wear like a white lab coat and
Yeah,
big
yeah,
old goofy spectacles
exactly.
when
Yeah,
people are
well,
over?
and a Walter White hat, and yeah, yeah, no, exactly. No, it's not usually, no. But what we do, I do have lights and switches, so you can turn it down a bit and sort of give it a little bit of an ambiance feel if you want to. Though you might not see that very well because of all the reflection of the rest of the house. But
No, it looks good. Yeah, you can see it perfectly fine.
yeah,
Very cool. So let's take a gander at your taps, because you've got a nice Micromatic tap right over there, don't you? Yeah, look at
that's
that
right.
thing.
Yeah, this is all Micromatics. So the one issue I found with home brewing stuff is everybody's out to make a buck, and for some reason, draft equipment in homebrew scale tends to be made as absolutely cheap as possible. So when it was time to do this, I didn't have this at the old house. I wanted something sort of more industrial. So I looked around, like, what do bars use? What equipment do they go after? And lo and behold, there's Micromatic. It's a company out of the US and they ship worldwide. They have various shapes and sizes of towers and everything, as well as the trunk lines that you need to actually feed the beer in. So this is a chilled um, tower. It's got 8 taps, and inside these shanks here is like copper or stainless blocks. And if you can't see them obviously from your vantage, but they're cold. Like there's a constant recirculation that goes on so that you don't get foaming when you pour. If you don't cool your lines, that CO2 in solution, because the warmer beer comes out of solution, and you get constant. Your first half beer is going to be just a splurgy mess of foam because it's
Yep.
mostly air and CO2. So these are constantly recirculated. And just to
And what are you? Are you recirculating water? Are you using glycol? What are you
I'm
using?
using RV antifreeze. So there's a type of
Ah.
a mixture that you get. You put it in your toilets in your RV in the winter or at your cottage or something. And pardon the absolute mess in my keezer, but this is the
Okay,
way.
so you just have all your kegs in a keezer.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
cool.
So these are, I think it holds about 10. I have 8 on tap, and the spaghetti mess of stuff on top is all the lines. And then I have, well, these things too, which are desiccant packs, just to keep the humidity out, because typically you're serving above freezing. You don't want the moisture to rust the inside. It's a constant problem with
Right.
keezers. So there's a collar that's been built just out of cheap wood, 2x4s, painted black. And the main reason for that is just to give you more room for your kegs too, to have room to connect things, but more importantly, to give you a place to run your lines out of. Like I have 4 gas lines that come in, and then we have this giant, absolutely massive trunk line that comes in and out. You can see it here with all
Yep.
the various lines. And there's 8 product lines and 2 glycol lines. So there's 2 glycol lines that end up running down into this little container, which is full of the RV antifreeze. And it has a small little pond pump, something like a $20 or $40 pond pump that's been running now 24/7, I think, for, yikes, since almost 20 years, I think. So it runs pretty well, yeah. No problems there.
Awesome.
And
That's very
to
cool.
chill a bit better, right beside it, I have a smaller freezer, which is just full of hops. So just bags and bags of hops like this that I've repackaged. So you should buy them a pound at a time. And I don't know if you can see that, but here there's the loop that comes in. This is just the glycol line that comes in, and hard to see back there is a coil, which is a copper coil, which is used to chill.
Hmm.
And it's pressed up against the freezer wall. So I found that just the liquid in the keezer wasn't enough to keep things cold. So I kind of cheated and did this thing. In a previous,
Yeah, no, hey, but it works because it holds your hops as well.
well,
So
exactly,
it's
yeah.
doing.
I had that for the hops already, so I figured that made sense. Back at the old house, we had a bar fridge that was right in the bar, obviously. And I did the exact same thing in the freezer compartment of it. I put the coil inside the floor of the freezer compartment with, I think, some heavy weight on it, and just recirculated through there constantly to keep the chilling stuff cold. This glycol stuff, like glycol, is extremely corrosive, extremely poisonous. That's why I don't like to really use it. RV antifreeze is safe. It doesn't. If it ever freezes, it doesn't freeze. It turns to slush, so you don't have burst lines. Like once in a while, our power goes out here, and so it will actually turn to slush. And that's why I have the extra long loop here, so I can just pull it out and leave it for half an hour, and it'll thaw itself, and then things continue running.
Nice.
Yep.
Very cool. Well, Cal, you have a heck of a
Thank
setup,
you.
and your website is a fantastic resource for people who are trying to get into brewing or who want to upgrade what they've currently got. If you're doing like the cooking it on a stove or on a propane burner and you're looking to go to electric, hit up their website. The website's fantastic. There's all sorts of stuff you can buy parts from. You can just get plans and buy it all yourself. I mean, it's a great resource. Like I said, I've been to it many times. Before I was buying all my own stuff, I looked at your website several times trying to figure out what I wanted to do
Sure.
for my own home brewing.
Yeah, I think
So
I'm hoping it's a great resource for those that just want to steal ideas, basically. So, I put things out there, and I see people that come up with their own versions of solutions, which is great. It just gives you a different vantage point and some ideas, things to look out for, things to consider, things to think about. So, hopefully, that helps others. I've done the same with everything. Even
yeah,
when we built this basement here, I blogged it almost every single day and gave links and ideas and showed how things are done, from a carpentry to a tile perspective, and just to give people ideas, and also for my own sake, because I'd had a lot of feedback. People would say, "Well, did you consider this? Consider that?" All these different things, which no, I didn't consider. So it's a sharing of ideas, which I try to do.
yep. So once again, if people are looking for information, what is the address of your website?
It's theelectricbrewery.com. So THE electricbrewery.com.
All right. And if people want to follow you on the socials, how do they do
Well, they
that?
can do it through our website, or they can also search for that, at theelectricbrewery.com. Except for Twitter, we're at Electric Brewery on Twitter.
There you go. Awesome. Is there before we sign off, Kal, because we are at the 30-minute mark, which is about where I like to try and
Sure.
end my shows. Is there anything else that you'd like to add, or anything you'd like to say, or anybody or thing you'd like to give a shout out to?
Well, just say people should experiment. Enjoy your brewing, try different things. Don't be afraid to experiment. Part of brewing is trying and trying again. The people that are the best brewers in the world are the ones who aren't afraid to try different things. And if people do have questions about anything brewing related or things on my website, by all means, you can reach out to me too. I can be reached directly at Kal, Kal, at theelectricbrewery.com. Happy to take any questions people have and point people in the right direction or give other opinions and whatever else they want to hear.
Awesome. Kal, I really appreciate you coming on the show. I hope the people who watch the show find it informative, and hopefully they'll visit your website for some ideas and possibly to buy some equipment.
Well, thanks for having me, Rob. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Well, everybody, until next time, I'm Rob from the internet. Cheers.
Later.